I was thunderstruck by Ms. Gorman's words and the powerful images when I saw it for the first time on CBS this morning. I know that some of those images may be controversial, as are the questions about policing we'll be talking about today. Those of us who are white and middle class grew up probably with a benign image of the police and a glorified TV image of valiant policemen and a few sexy police women. Remember Dragnet, Adam 12, Mod Squad, Police Story, or my personal favorite from the early 1980s was Hill Street Blues. Policing on TV was noble, sexy, courageous, and important crimes and relationships could be solved in an hour. Black people, Black actors often played supporting roles as the caring beat cop on these shows. But if you grew up Black or Indigenous or Latino, those TV images did not obscure the war on crime, the war on drugs taking place in your neighborhoods, and the police brutal response to events like Watts or Wounded Knee, the Rodney King verdict, or the very real fear that your teenage son might be killed by a police officer. Police in the United States kill 1,000 people a year. 1,000 people. In comparison, in the last 24 years, there have only been 55 police killings in England and Wales. 55 in 24 years. Black people are 2.5 times more likely to be killed by the police than white people. Jill Lepore, in an article in the New Yorker that David Slater sent me, wrote, "The victims of police brutality are disproportionately Black teenage boys, children. According to an article in the New York Times, in some urban areas, police have used force against Black people 7 times the rate they do to white people. I learned this week that the sheer number of police and police departments in the US is staggering. There are nearly 700,000 police officers in the US. There are 18,000 police departments. Since 1997, the Pentagon has given away more than $7 billion of surplus military equipment to 8,000 of those local police departments. The total funding for the police exceeds $115 billion. Yeah, you heard that right, $115 billion. So before I talk more about what I've learned about policing in the US, I want to get a sense of where we are on these issues. And through the magic of Zoom, we've created a poll. You can answer this poll yes, no, or don't know, or if you're not sure, just put don't know. I don't want you to overthink this. Just put up your first thought, decide who in your home, if there are more than one of you, is going to get to vote. We're not recording these polls or the vote. We don't know how individuals voted. This is just to kind of get a quick sense of where we are. So Beth, can you put up the poll now? And you're going to answer, there are 4 questions in this first part of it. It says hit next because you're on your phone, do that. And number 1, do you think major changes need to be made in policing in the US? Number 2, do you favor eliminating police unions? Number 3, do you favor abolishing police departments? And number 4, do you favor reducing police department funding and shifting some of that money to social programs? And then you push submit. So Beth, can you put up the results of that poll? So 96% of you think that there needs to be changing in policing. And just as a point of reference, the Gallup poll that was done in June had 53%. So we're much more likely to do that. We're a little more controversial about, do we favor eliminating police unions, with 15% of us saying yes, and 44% of us saying no, and 41% being that don't know or not sure. Only 4% of us agree with the UUA's call to abolish police departments in total, with 7% saying don't know. And 79% of us favor reducing police department funding and shifting some of that money to social programs. So we seem to have a closer agreement on that. At a webinar I attended in June on policing, the presenters emphasized that policing in the United States has racist origins at its foundation. Policing was begun in the US to protect white people's property, specifically the Black people they owned. The first police units in the United States were slave patrols designed to terrorize Black people. In our own state of Virginia in 1680, white men were given the right to kill slaves if they were found absent from their masters. Any white person could kill a slave who was not with their master. The first slave patrols began in Virginia in 1726. Reverend Susan Gray, my colleague, friend, and the president of the UA writes, policing in America is a system rooted in anti-Blackness that assumes and reinforces expectations of white innocence and Black guilt. So although across the country and certainly among us, there is now greater consensus that policing must indeed change, there's nothing new, my friends, about police violence and brutality. Way back in 1931, the ACLU published a report called Lawlessness in Law Enforcement. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. at the March on Washington in 1963, 57 years ago this week, said, "We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality." You probably know there are many policy proposals to reform policing, and there are those that argue that the only thing that will work is to abolish the police completely and create something brand new in its place that does not have racism as its foundation. An alternative to defund the police are proposals to divest and invest, to dramatically reduce or divest the more than $115 billion that go to local policing, and to invest or redirect those monies to community-based initiatives that increase public health and safety. One successful model you may have read about in the Washington Post is called the CAHOOTS program in Eugene, Oregon. And it's currently being studied for adoption by the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors. For more than 30 years now in Eugene, Oregon, when calls come to the police for crisis situations, break-ins, vandalism, domestic violence, drunk or intoxication, minor car accidents, those are not handled by the police. They are sent to mental health or behavioral health experts. Those mental health workers receive 500 hours of training before they begin their jobs. And compare that to the 8 hours that a New York City policeman gets in crisis intervention. You've probably read that Minneapolis has just voted to end police officers in their elementary and high schools, replacing them with school mental health counselors. The Fairfax County chapter of the NAACP has asked Governor Northam to do likewise. Think about it. Does the school really need armed police? Do you need someone with a gun to watch out for speeders or to come take a report at a traffic accident? Is a trained social worker a better first responder to an unarmed domestic violence dispute? There are surely lots of times where a mental health professional would be better able to handle a situation than an untrained police officer with a gun. And surely that would be less dangerous to people of color. The UUA is asking its congregations to be bolder and to follow the lead of Black and Indigenous activists. The Reverend Gray writes, "This moment calls us to be prophetic and to imagine a world without policing, Black and Indigenous people and other folks of color have already created alternatives to policing because these structures haven't kept them safe. We must follow the lead of these communities and imagine a world that centers collective care, community investment, and restorative justice, rather than surveillance, punishment, incarceration, and policing. The UUA is asking its congregations to publicly advocate for defunding the police and to assure that we will not call the police if vandalism occurs on our property or to our church building. So I want to take another quick pulse on where are we on what the UUA is asking us to do. And so Beth, can you put up the next poll? And again, I'm just asking for your quick response. There are only 2 questions this time. Number 1, should UUCR advocate for defunding police departments as the UUA has asked? And number 2, should the UUCR continue to call the police if vandalism occurs in our flags, to our flags, our land, or our building? And if you would push submit. Beth, can we see the results? So 28% of us are ready for us to advocate defunding police, with 24% saying they don't know and 49% saying no. So that's a pretty split vote for anybody who thinks all UUs think alike. And should we continue to call the police if there's vandalism? 42% of you say yes, 18% of you say no, and 39% of you say don't know or that you're not sure. So what does that tell me? It tells me we're not ready to take a position on the UUA's request, and we have some work to do. After the election, yes, after, because right now we are taking the lead of our Social Justice and Action Committee and concentrating all of our advocacy, or most of our advocacy activities on get out the vote. But after the election, I'd like to put together a task force on the ministry side to help us look at these issues around policing and create educational opportunities for us to understand more about what we are being called on to do by the UUA, to listen to Black and Indigenous activists, and to raise our concerns and to perhaps engage with local police. So if you are interested in being part of this, please send me an email and I will get back to you after the election. For now, I'm going to ask you, can we take more time to learn more about this issue, about policing? Can we keep our minds open? Can we try on each other's glasses like that sweet video? Can we listen and read the voices of Black, Indigenous, and people of color's perspectives? I'm hoping that many of you are going to join me at the car rally on Wednesday night at St. Thomas Beckett's. It starts at 6. I get there at 5:30. We're co-sponsoring this. MLK Christian Church is the lead, and I will be speaking. So I hope that you will join with me as we publicly affirm that Black lives matter. In June of this year, reporter Jonathan Capehart asked the late Honorable John Lewis, what would he say to people who feel as though they've been giving it their all, but nothing's changing? John Lewis, the Honorable John Lewis answered, you must be able and prepared to give until you cannot give anymore. We must use our time and our space on this little planet that we call Earth to make a lasting contribution, to leave it a little better than we found it. And now that need is greater than ever before. In a tweet last year, the congressman wrote, do not get lost in a sea of despair. Do not become bitter or hostile. Be hopeful. Be optimistic. Never, ever be afraid to make some noise and get in good trouble, necessary trouble. My friends, may we make it so. Amen.